So in the last section, we saw how to use the useState hook with the React Context API. In this section, we will set up context with the useReducer hook. In this functionality will closely mimic Redux. Let's start off by creating a new property of state in our initial state in the hook's reducer. And let's just call it stateprop2 and initialize it to false. And instead of creating new actions for this one property, we can just add it to our already existing action types of success and failure. So just add it as a second property after stateprop1. So we're going to set up the useReducer hook in the exact same way that we did in hooks container 1. And to save some time, we can just copy and paste the code from that file. And in the import statements, remember to do // instead of // And then in our useReducer variable names, let's change the names to state context global and dispatch context global. And then we can create two functions to handle dispatching actions in the exact same way that we did in hooks container 1. And to save some time, we can just copy and paste the code from there. There's no advantage to writing these functions from scratch. And just so we can tell them apart, let's change the names to handle context dispatch true and handle context dispatch false. Now we can go to our value prop and then pass in these functions to the properties. And we'll do this in a similar way that we did with the useState hook. Let's first set the value of the state, and let's call this property reducer global state. And to access the value, it's a little bit different than what we saw in useState hook. We actually do state context global dot stateprop2. And remember, state context global is the value we set as the variable name in the useReducer hook, and stateprop2 is actually the value we set in the initial state in actually the hook's reducer file. So unlike the useState hook, you actually have to specify the specific property because state context global holds both stateprop1 and stateprop2. To pass the functions down as props, we can do it literally the same exact way as we saw in useState. Let's declare a property called dispatch context true and then pass in an arrow function that calls the handle context dispatch true function. And we can do the same thing for the dispatching the failure action as well. So we're actually now done setting up the app.js file, and we can go back to our hooks container to use these properties we just set. So as we've been doing so far, we can create two buttons that will change the state first. And also we don't have to initialize the context because as you see at the top of the file, we already have it initialized. So we can just continue using this same context variable. We don't have to initialize another one for the useReducer hook. And again, to call the functions to change the state, we just do context.dispatch context true, which is just the name of the property we set in the value prop. And in our render method, we can also display the stateprop1 and access the reducer global state the same exact way that we did the value global state. So just do context.reducer global state. And since it's a boolean, we can pass in a paragraph text saying stateprop2 is true or false. And I'll just quickly summarize what's happening here. So context.reducer global state is a property we user defined in the value prop in app.js. And this reducer global state property holds the value of state context global dot stateprop2. And state context global is a variable we define that holds the value of the useReducer hook. And the useReducer hook can access the stateprop2 value we set in the hook's reducer.js file. So hopefully that helps you better understand the flow and where everything is coming from and how it works together. Oh, and let's just quickly fix a typo here. It should be dispatch context global, not just dispatch. And let's check our hooks container 1 file to see if we have any typos. And yes, it seems we're missing a closing p tag. And let's check the rest of our hooks container. And it seems to be fine, so let's save everything and check our browser. So let's go to our hooks container and then dispatch the context true action. And yes, stateprop2 is now true. So let's go to the home component and go back to our hooks container to see if the state persists. And yes, even though we went to another component, our stateprop2 is still true, which means it is working.